Ada for kicking my son's girlfriend out. My 16-year-old son, whose childhood had been marked by a quiet and steady demeanor, met a girl at a summer camp where he worked during the past season. It was one of those seemingly mundane, everyday encounters that end up shifting the trajectory of a young life in a way no one quite expects. The camp itself was nestled in a rural area, surrounded by towering trees, their branches stretching skyward like a cathedral of green, casting dappled light onto dirt paths well worn by generations of campers. The scent of pine needles lingered in the air, mingling with the laughter of children, the clang of lunch bells, and the echo of campfire songs sung off-key but with boundless enthusiasm. It was the kind of setting that evokes nostalgia long before it even ends, a backdrop where bonds form quickly and intensely under the spell of summer's fleeting magic. He had taken the job reluctantly at first, not out of passion but more out of a sense of obligation. It was his first real job, a step toward independence, and he had been hesitant about spending an entire summer away from home. We, as parents, had encouraged him to go. It would be good for him, we said, to get some fresh air, to meet new people, to break away from the glow of screens and the familiar rhythms of our household. He was a reserved boy, preferring his small circle of friends to large social gatherings, and the camp seemed like a perfect opportunity for him to come out of his shell, to experience life beyond the borders of his comfort zone. Little did we know just how transformative those few months would be. The girl in question entered his life with the swiftness and intensity of a summer storm. Her name was Chloe. She was charismatic in a way that drew people toward her, the kind of girl who seemed to command attention effortlessly, with a natural charm that bordered on magnetic. There was something about her presence that seemed to fill the room, even if that room was just an open field under the sky. She was confident, almost to the point of arrogance, and carried herself with the self-assuredness that often accompanies youth, a sense of invincibility that comes from never having experienced true hardship. They met during the first week of camp, and by the second, my son was talking about her constantly in his nightly calls home. At first, it was subtle. He mentioned her in passing, dropping her name into conversations like a pebble into a pond, creating ripples that grew wider with each call. Chloe said this, he'd tell us. Chloe did that. There was a spark in his voice, a lightness we hadn't heard before. It was the sound of a boy on the brink of discovering what it meant to care for someone deeply, of emotions he hadn't yet fully processed. By the third week, it was clear that Chloe wasn't just another camp friend. She had become a significant presence in his life. He spoke of her as if she were the sun around which his world now orbited. "She understands me," he said one evening. "She really listens." It was the kind of statement that warmed our hearts and made us nervous all at once. There is a particular vulnerability that comes with a first love, a complete surrender of self to another, and as parents, we couldn't help but worry about the inevitable heartache that often accompanies such intense emotions. When he returned home at the end of the summer, it was obvious that something had changed in him. His demeanor had shifted. There was a newfound confidence in his stride, a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He carried himself differently, as though he had stepped into a new version of himself. But there was also a distance that hadn't existed prior, a subtle pulling away from the familiar safety net of home, as if his heart and mind were now tethered to someone beyond our reach. Chloe became a fixture in his life. They texted constantly, their phones buzzing with a frequency that bordered on obsessive. They met up on weekends, their time together punctuated by long walks, shared meals, and stolen moments of intimacy. They seemed inseparable, bound by the intensity of young love, the kind that feels all-consuming and eternal. He was smitten, utterly and completely. And like many first relationships, it wasn't long before he began to speak of a future that stretched far beyond the present. "They're madly in love," my wife would say, shaking her head with a mix of amusement and concern. "He's totally going to marry her, or at least he thinks he is." And that was the heart of it. In his mind, this wasn't a fleeting romance. It wasn't a summer fling that would fade with the changing leaves. It was forever. He spoke of her with a conviction that only teenagers possess, an unwavering belief in the permanence of things that, to the rest of us, seemed temporary at best. They had their lives mapped out already, or at least he did. There were plans for college, plans for travel, plans for a shared life that seemed far too detailed for a boy of his age. As parents, we tried to balance our support with caution. We didn't want to dismiss his feelings or belittle his experience, but we also knew the fragility of young love. Just take it slow, we'd advise, though our words often seemed to fall on deaf ears. He was 16, after all, and convinced he knew better. He saw himself as mature, capable of making decisions that would shape the rest of his life. To him, this wasn't just a relationship, it was the foundation of his future. And Chloe encouraged this line of thinking. She fed into his fantasies of forever, painting a picture of a life together that seemed idyllic on the surface. She talked about their future home, their careers, even their children. It was all so premature, so hastily constructed, but in the haze of infatuation, he couldn't see it. He was enamored, blinded by the intensity of his emotions, unable to recognize the red flags that had begun to sprout like weeds in a garden. It was hard to watch as parents. Hard to see our son, who had always been so rational, so level-headed, become so completely consumed by another person. We wanted to be happy for him, to share in his joy, but there was an undercurrent of unease that we couldn't shake. Something about Chloe didn't sit right with us. There was a sharpness to her, a controlling edge that became more apparent with each interaction. She had a way of making subtle jabs, of asserting her dominance in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. It was in the way she corrected him, the way she dismissed his interests, the way she seemed to mold him into someone he wasn't. But he couldn't see it. Or if he did, he chose to ignore it. He was 16 and in love, after all, and to him, that was all that mattered. The rest of the world could have crumbled, and he wouldn't have noticed. Chloe was his world now, and nothing we said or did seemed to change that fact. I'm going to be honest, I don't like her. As a father, I've always tried to be open-minded when it comes to the choices my children make, particularly when it comes to relationships. I understand that love, especially a first love, can be all-consuming. I understand that teenagers, with their inexperience and unchecked emotions, tend to view the world through a lens of absolutes. Everything is either perfect or disastrous. Every feeling is the most intense it has ever been, and every relationship feels destined to last forever. But no matter how hard I've tried to put aside my personal biases and approach this relationship with fairness, there's a part of me that simply can't shake the discomfort I feel whenever I think about Chloe. It's not just a vague unease, the kind that comes from watching your child grow up and make mistakes. No, it's something deeper, something rooted in specific observations that I can't ignore. From the very beginning, I've noticed patterns of behavior in her that I find troubling. Chloe has consistently been dismissive of my son's needs and interests. It's not just a passing observation, it's a recurring theme in their interactions. Whenever my son talks about something that excites him, whether it's his love of basketball, his fascination with woodworking, or even his aspirations to study engineering after high school, Chloe's reaction is almost always the same. She either brushes it off with a dismissive comment or redirects the conversation back to herself. There's no genuine engagement, no curiosity about who he is as a person. It's as if his interests are nothing more than background noise, irrelevant to the narrative she's constructing around their relationship. It pains me to see it because I know how much those interests mean to him. He's always been a curious, passionate boy, eager to explore new hobbies and learn new things. But with Chloe, he seems to stifle those parts of himself, as if he's learned that they won't be met with the enthusiasm he once hoped for. What's worse is that this dismissiveness isn't limited to his hobbies and dreams. It extends to more fundamental aspects of who he is, including his appearance. One issue that has regularly come up between the two of them is my son's weight. Now, to provide some context, my son stands at 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighs around 170 pounds. Yes, he's carrying a little extra weight, but nothing that would be cause for concern. He's a tall, broad-shouldered boy, with a build that he's inherited from both sides of our family. His pediatrician has always assured us that he's healthy, and he's projected to grow even taller, somewhere between 6 feet 3 inches and 6 feet 5 inches. His frame is naturally large, and while he might not fit the narrow societal standard of thin, he's far from unhealthy. But according to Chloe, he's too fat. She hasn't just mentioned it once or twice in passing, it's something that has come up repeatedly. My son, who's always been fairly secure in his appearance, has started to internalize her criticisms. He's told me on multiple occasions that Chloe has a plan to help him lose 30 to 40 pounds. 30 to 40 pounds. That's not just a minor adjustment, it's a drastic transformation that would strip him of a significant portion of his body weight. It's an unrealistic and frankly harmful goal, one that doesn't take into account his natural build or his long-term health. The first time he mentioned her plan, my wife and I exchanged concerned glances. We've both worked hard to instill healthy habits in our children, emphasizing the importance of balance and self-acceptance. We've never wanted our kids to feel pressured to conform to unrealistic body standards, and we've always encouraged them to focus on how they feel rather than how they look. So to hear our son talk about losing nearly a quarter of his body weight to please someone else was deeply unsettling. We tried to approach the topic gently. "Don't you think that's a bit much?" my wife asked him one evening over dinner. "It's one thing to want to be healthier, but losing that much weight seems excessive, especially when you're still growing." I nodded in agreement. "Your body is still changing," I added. "You're going to grow taller, and your weight will naturally adjust. There's no need to rush it or put that kind of pressure on yourself." But he brushed off our concerns. "It's not a big deal," he said with a shrug. "She's just trying to help me reach my goals." His goals? That's how he framed it. As if this obsession with weight loss was something he'd come up with on his own, rather than an expectation imposed on him by someone else. I couldn't help but feel that he was parroting her words, internalizing her judgments as if they were his own thoughts. "Is it really your goal?" I asked cautiously. "Or is it her goal for you?" He looked uncomfortable at the question, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact. "It's both," he mumbled. "I mean, I've always wanted to get in better shape." There was a kernel of truth in that statement. Like many teenagers, my son had occasionally expressed a desire to be more fit. But never before had he spoken with such urgency or rigidity about his weight. It was clear that Chloe's influence was shaping his self-image in a way that wasn't entirely healthy. What troubled me the most was the conditional nature of her affection. It seemed that Chloe's love for my son was contingent upon him changing who he was, losing weight, adjusting his appearance, molding himself into someone he wasn't. That's not what love is supposed to be. Love, real love, is about acceptance. It's about embracing someone for who they are, flaws and all, not about trying to reshape them to fit an idealized version of a partner. The fact that Chloe was so fixated on his weight and so willing to make hurtful comments about it suggested to me that her feelings for him were shallow, rooted more in appearance than in genuine connection. We tried to communicate this to him, carefully choosing our words to avoid sounding overly critical. "If someone really loves you," my wife told him gently, "they'll love you for who you are, not for who they think you should be." But our words seemed to fall on deaf ears. He was 16, after all, and in the throes of first love. He couldn't see the red flags we were pointing out. All he saw was a girl who, in his eyes, cared deeply about him and wanted to build a future together. It's hard, as a parent, to watch your child make choices that you know may lead to heartache. It's even harder when those choices are influenced by someone you don't trust. Chloe's obsession with my son's weight wasn't just a matter of health, it was about control. It was about her shaping him to fit her vision of the perfect partner. And that control extended beyond his physical appearance. She dictated what he ate, how much he exercised, and even what clothes he wore. It was subtle, but it was there, like a creeping vine slowly wrapping around him and squeezing tighter with each passing day. I worried about the impact this was having on his self-esteem. He had always been a confident, self-assured boy, but lately, I'd noticed cracks in that confidence. He second-guessed himself more often. He apologized unnecessarily. He seemed to walk on eggshells, afraid of saying or doing something that might upset Chloe. This wasn't the boy I knew. This whole situation came to a head on New Year's Eve, a night that had always held a special place in our family traditions. For as long as I could remember, we had marked the end of each year with a quiet yet meaningful celebration at home, a sit-down dinner, a countdown to midnight, and a gathering in the living room to reflect on the past 12 months and talk about hopes for the year ahead. It wasn't a grand, glittering party, nor was it something we ever invited many people to. It was intimate, personal, and something I always looked forward to as a way to bring our family closer together, to remind ourselves of the bonds that tied us. This year, though, there was an unspoken tension in the air from the moment my son asked if Chloe could join us for dinner. Or rather, it wasn't so much an ask as it was an announcement. "Chloe's coming over for New Year's Eve," he said, as if the decision had already been made and any further discussion would be unnecessary. It caught me and my wife off guard, not because we hadn't expected her to be part of his evening plans, but because this was a family tradition, one we hadn't anticipated sharing with someone outside the household. Still, we agreed. We wanted to be welcoming. We wanted to show that, despite our reservations about the relationship, we were willing to give Chloe a chance to be part of our family's celebration. I spent the better part of the day preparing a healthy, balanced meal that I thought everyone could enjoy. I made a stir-fry with tofu and a generous portion of fresh vegetables, seasoned lightly with soy sauce and garlic. Cooking had always been my way of bringing people together. There was something satisfying about seeing everyone gathered around the table, enjoying a meal I had prepared, sharing stories, laughing, and savoring the warmth of home-cooked food. I hoped, in some small way, that this dinner could be a bridge, that it might help ease the growing tension I felt whenever Chloe was around. When she arrived that evening, I noticed right away that her demeanor was different. There was an edge to her smile, a sharpness to her tone, as though she were putting on a performance for us rather than genuinely participating in the celebration. She was polite, sure, but there was an air of detachment about her, as though she were merely tolerating our company for the sake of my son. Still, I tried to keep things light. I asked her about school, about her plans for the future, but her answers were clipped, uninterested. It was clear she didn't want to be there with us. She wanted to be alone with my son. The dinner itself went smoothly enough, at least at first. My wife and I made conversation, and my son chimed in occasionally, though it was obvious his attention was mostly on Chloe. She barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate as though she were only pretending to eat. I caught her casting glances at my son's plate, watching him carefully, as if taking mental notes of how much he was eating. It wasn't until he stood up to get a second helping that everything came crashing down. He rose from his chair and headed toward the kitchen, his plate in hand, and Chloe's eyes followed him with a look that was both calculating and judgmental. Before he could even reach the counter to serve himself, she reached out and lightly slapped his shoulder, a playful gesture on the surface, but there was nothing playful about what she said next. "Aren't you fat enough?" she asked, her voice sharp and cold. "I've told you I don't want a Fada's husband, and I certainly don't want Fada's kids." The words hung in the air like a slap to the face. Time seemed to freeze for a moment as the weight of her comments settled over the room. My wife and I both sat in stunned silence, our eyes darting between Chloe and our son, waiting to see how he would react. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of hurt cross his face, a crack in his carefully constructed armor. But just as quickly, he brushed it off, plastering on a sheepish smile as if to downplay the significance of her words. "She's just joking," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. My wife and I exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that communicates 1,000 unspoken words in an instant. We both knew this wasn't something we could let slide. This wasn't a harmless joke. It was cruel. It was disrespectful. And it was completely inappropriate, especially in our home. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and walked toward the kitchen. "Can I have a word with you two?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. My son looked hesitant, glancing at Chloe as if to gauge her reaction before nodding. The three of us moved into the kitchen, leaving my wife at the table, her expression a mixture of shock and anger. Once we were out of earshot, I turned to Chloe. "I'm going to be very clear," I said, keeping my voice steady but leaving no room for misinterpretation. "You are a guest in our home. We welcomed you here tonight because my son cares about you, and we wanted to make you feel included in our family's traditions. But what you just said, what you called him, was completely unacceptable." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not interested in excuses," I continued. "There is no context, no justification that makes what you said okay. You may think you are helping him by making comments about his weight, but that's not your place. This is our home, and I won't have anyone disrespecting my son like that, not under my roof." My son looked mortified, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Dad, you're making it worse," he muttered. "No, I'm setting boundaries," I corrected. "Boundaries that should have been set a long time ago. I understand that you are 16 and you have the right to make your own choices. I can't control what you do outside of this house, and I wouldn't try to. But inside this house, there are rules. There are standards of respect that everyone is expected to follow. And if someone can't meet those standards, they aren't welcome here." Chloe's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms over her chest. "I was just trying to help him stick to his goals," she said defensively. "He told me he wants to lose weight, and I'm just holding him accountable by humiliating him in front of his family." I shot back. "By calling him names? That's not holding someone accountable. That's bullying. And if you think that's the way to show love or support, then you have a lot to learn." There was a tense silence as my words hung in the air. My son wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at the floor with a pained expression. Chloe, on the other hand, looked defiant, as though she couldn't comprehend why her behavior was being called into question. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said finally. "We've had enough drama for one night." Chloe scoffed, grabbing her coat from the back of a chair. "Fine," she snapped. I was planning to leave anyway. She stormed out without another word, slamming the front door behind her. My son stood frozen in place, his shoulders slumped, his expression a mixture of hurt, anger, and confusion. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "You didn't have to embarrass me." "I wasn't trying to embarrass you," I said softly. "I was standing up for you. There's a difference." But I knew he wouldn't see it that way. Not right now. He was too deep in it, too blinded by his feelings for Chloe to recognize the toxicity of the situation. I could only hope that, with time, he'd come to see the truth. But for now, all I could do was stand firm in my belief that no one, not even someone he loved, had the right to tear him down. My son thinks I was completely out of line that night. In his eyes, I embarrassed him in front of the girl he loves, humiliated him in front of someone whose opinion has come to matter more to him than his own family's. To him, I was overstepping boundaries, interfering in his personal life in a way that I had no right to. And, of course, at 16, he views any parental intervention as an infringement on his freedom, a direct challenge to his ability to make his own decisions. He's adamant that I'm the one in the wrong. He's convinced that Chloe was just helping him, holding him accountable for his weight loss goals, and that he was wrong to want a second helping at dinner in the first place. He believes she had his best interests at heart when she made those comments, that she was simply encouraging him to stick to a healthier lifestyle, and that I, with my reaction, had completely misunderstood the situation. The words he repeated to me the following day still echo in my mind. She's only trying to help me become a better person, Dad. You don't get it. I don't get it. I've been his father for 16 years. I've seen him take his first steps, lose his first tooth, struggle through his awkward middle school years, and find his footing as a young man. I've cheered him on at his basketball games, helped him with homework late at night, and supported every dream he's ever had, no matter how far-fetched. And yet, now, because of one girl, I'm suddenly the outsider, the person who doesn't get it. It's hard not to feel hurt by his words. But more than that, I feel worried. Deeply, profoundly worried. Because this isn't just about a teenage crush or a fleeting infatuation. It's about the way Chloe has taken control of his self-image, the way she's made him question his worth and see himself as inadequate unless he conforms to her standards. And the way she's convinced him that all of this is normal, even healthy. I've watched him change since he met her. Subtle changes at first, the way he stopped asking for seconds at dinner, the way he started wearing baggier clothes to hide his body, the way he'd hesitate before eating anything that wasn't explicitly healthy. And then more obvious changes, the way he'd criticize himself in front of the mirror, pinch at his sights as if searching for flaws, and talk about how he needed to shrink down to be more attractive. I've heard him talk about Chloe's plans for him, the way she's mapped out his future weight loss goals with the precision of a military campaign. 30 to 40 pounds, she says. As if his body is something that needs fixing, something that isn't already enough. And it's not just the weight issue that concerns me. It's the way Chloe talks about the future with such certainty, as if it's already set in stone. The way she's already thinking about marriage and children, about what kind of husband and father my son will be, but only on the condition that he fits her ideal image. They're 16. They haven't even finished high school, and yet she's already imposing long-term expectations on him, shaping him into someone he's not, all in the name of building a future together. I worry about what this is doing to his sense of self. I worry that he's losing sight of who he is, of what he wants, because he's so desperate to make her happy, to keep her love and approval. He's a good kid, kind, thoughtful, and empathetic. But he's also young and impressionable, and right now, he's putting all his self-worth in the hands of someone who seems to care more about controlling him than loving him for who he is. The day after the New Year's Eve incident, he sat me down and told me he was thinking about moving out. I could stay with Chloe's family, he said, as if it were a reasonable option. They're always saying I'm welcome there. I'm not particularly worried about this threat. It's the kind of thing a teenager says in the heat of the moment, more to provoke a reaction than to actually follow through. But it does speak to how deeply entrenched he is in this relationship, how much he's willing to give up to keep it going. The thought of him moving in with Chloe's family, a family I don't know, a family that may very well be encouraging this toxic dynamic, sends a chill down my spine. I've tried to explain to him why I reacted the way I did. I've tried to make him see that my actions weren't about controlling his life or interfering in his relationship, but about setting boundaries, about protecting him from someone who, in my eyes, was crossing a line. There's a difference between encouragement and cruelty, I told him. And what she said to you, that wasn't encouragement. That was hurtful. And I won't stand by and watch someone tear you down like that. But he doesn't see it that way. To him, I'm the bad guy. I'm the one who's trying to sabotage his relationship, to drive a wedge between him and the girl he loves. And no matter how many times I try to explain my perspective, he remains steadfast in his belief that Chloe is helping him, that she's the best thing that's ever happened to him. It breaks my heart to see him so blinded by love, or what he thinks is love. Because real love doesn't come with conditions. Real love doesn't require you to change who you are to be worthy of it. Real love doesn't make you feel like you are not good enough. I've seen the way he lights up when he talks about her, the way he defends her fiercely, even when she doesn't deserve it. And I know that no matter what I say, he won't walk away from this relationship until he's ready. Until he sees for himself what we've been trying to show him all along. As a parent, That's the hardest part, knowing that you can't protect your child from every mistake, that sometimes they have to learn the hard way. I can only hope that when that moment comes, when the rose-colored glasses come off and he sees Chloe for who she really is, he'll remember the foundation we've tried to build for him. He'll remember that he's worthy of love just as he is, without having to change or shrink himself to fit someone else's expectations. For now, all I can do is stand by him, even if he doesn't realize it. I'll continue to be here, offering support and guidance, even if he pushes me away. I'll continue to remind him that he's enough, that he's always been enough no matter what anyone else says. So, Reddit, Ada? I don't think I am. I think I did what any parent would do in my situation. I stood up for my son when he couldn't stand up for himself. I set boundaries to protect him from someone who, in my eyes, was causing harm. And I did it because I love him. Because I want him to know that he deserves better than conditional love, better than hurtful comments disguised as help, better than a relationship that chips away at his self-worth. I know he's angry with me right now. I know he feels betrayed. But I also know that, deep down, he's a smart kid. He'll figure it out eventually. And when he does, I'll be right here, waiting, ready to remind him that he's always been enough, just as he is.